Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. She said my flagpole and metal sign ruined neighborhood harmony. A week later, her HOA thugs broke into my workshop with bolt cutters and fake IDs. Bad move. I'm not part of their HOA. And now she's headed to prison for fraud, trespassing, and running an extortion ring. I never thought a fresh coat of paint and a new gate would spark a full-blown war with a homeowners association I didn't even belong to. But that's exactly what happened. It started innocently enough, just another Friday morning at my fabrication yard. We'd just wrapped up a 6-month modernization of the front bay of the shop. New security gates, pressure-washed concrete, a polished aluminum sign with our company name, Rowell Fabrication and Metalworks, mounted dead center over the roll-up door. The final touch was a 25-foot American flag hoisted on a pole near the front fence. Classic, simple, clean. I was proud of it. I was going over some invoices with Sandra, my lead office manager, when I heard the beep of the front gate intercom. That alone was strange. Most deliveries and pickups used the side lot entrance. Truckers know better than to try tight turns off the main road. I walked to the screen and saw a woman I didn't recognize, standing outside in a cream blazer with sunglasses pushed up into her bleach blonde bob. She was flanked by two other HOA-looking types, one with a clipboard, the other with a tablet. Not clipboard like a contractor, more like a hall monitor. The woman tapped the button again, then looked straight into the camera. "This is Nancy Greaves, president of the Summit Groves HOA. We need to speak with the property owner about urgent compliance concerns." I stared at the screen for a moment. "Compliance?" I muttered. I pressed the intercom. "You've reached the property owner. What exactly is this about?" Nancy smiled like a wolf in linen. "If we could just step in for a moment, I'd be happy to explain." "I'm afraid this is a secured industrial site," I replied. "You can explain just fine through the gate." That smile never wavered, but I could see her jaw tighten. "Very well," she said. "We've received numerous complaints from our community regarding the visual impact of your recent renovations. The oversized signage, the flagpole, the reflective materials, all of it violates our aesthetic harmony covenant. We're here to initiate the onboarding process for your property into our HOA so that we can work together on bringing it into compliance." I blinked. "You want me to join your HOA?" "Correct," she said, as if this were a perfectly reasonable escalation. "Given the proximity of your facility to our community's eastern frontage, it falls within what we call the extended visual envelope. Any structures visible from Summit Groves are subject to review and alignment with HOA guidelines." I let out a low whistle. "Lady, this yard isn't part of your subdivision. It's been industrial land since Clinton's first term. I've got a grandfathered zoning exemption filed with the county in 1997. You don't get to waltz up and retroactively regulate my shop because you don't like polished aluminum." Nancy took a slow breath, then pulled a tri-fold packet from the clipboard guy's folder and held it up. "This outlines our voluntary annexation process. You'll see that several properties adjacent to Summit Groves have already agreed to enter into association partnership. You'd retain full ownership and operations, of course, but we'd help you with architectural standards, approved landscaping plans." I cut her off. "Let me stop you right there. I don't need help with landscaping. I don't need HOA paint palettes. And I sure as hell don't need a suburban committee deciding what my shop sign should look like." Nancy's voice cooled noticeably. "Mr. Rowell, I urge you to reconsider. Our association has invested significantly in preserving property values for our residents. Your facility is highly visible to our main residential entrance. Without visual harmony, those values can suffer. Surely you understand." "I understand extortion with a smile when I see it." That finally cracked her calm. Her nostrils flared just slightly, but she quickly recovered. "We'll leave you with the packet," she said flatly. "We strongly encourage you to comply. If we don't hear from you by the end of the month, the board may need to take further steps." "I won't be joining your HOA," I said. "Not now, not ever. And if anyone steps 1 foot on this property without legal authority, I'll have them arrested." Nancy raised her eyebrows as if surprised at my tone. "That's disappointing." But noted. The three of them turned and walked back to their SUV, which was double parked halfway across my gravel approach. I stood there for a while, the packet still hanging from the gate. Sandra came out a few minutes later and picked it up with a laugh. "This looks like a cult brochure," she muttered. We tossed it on the break room table and got back to work. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. I was in Las Vegas for a supplier expo when the call came in. It was Monday morning, just after 8. I'd grabbed a burnt hotel coffee and was reviewing stainless rates with a guy from San Diego when my phone buzzed. Caller ID. Yard cam alert. South Bay entry. I tapped it open out of habit, expecting to see maybe a bird or a tumbleweed tripping the sensor. Instead, the live feed loaded and froze me mid-sip. 3 people in neon yellow vests were walking straight into my workshop. One of them had bolt cutters hanging from his belt. The other was already stepping over the broken side gate like he did it every Tuesday. A third was holding up a phone, slowly panning across the bay, like they were filming a real estate listing. I tapped through the camera views, my thumb suddenly slick with sweat. They weren't just snooping. One of them was marking boxes inside with a black marker, actual tags right on crates of precision-formed aluminum. Another opened a utility locker and took photos of the equipment inside. I didn't even hang up on the sales rep. I just said something's wrong and left. By the time I was in the truck headed back to Reno, I'd already called Officer Raines, the sheriff's deputy who patrolled the outer industrial zones. I told him I had evidence of an active break-in, possibly by individuals impersonating government inspectors. He said a unit would be dispatched immediately. 4 hours later, I was back at the yard. The back gate was still hanging half open, chain cut clean through. The side personnel door had its lock visibly snapped, the strike plate torn out of the frame. Inside, there were bright orange circles marked on half a dozen sealed equipment crates. Some of them held high-value client components waiting for delivery. My stomach turned when I saw fingerprints on the lathe controls. It felt like an invasion, not just of space, of order, of security, of trust. A deputy cruiser was already there, and Officer Raines stood waiting under the overhang, with his notebook open. "Mr. Rowell," he greeted me, shaking my hand firmly. "We've been trying to reach you. This situation's unusual." "Tell me about it." "We pulled one of the license plates off your footage," he said. "It's registered to Summit Grove's Homeowners Association. Vehicle's been used before by their community enforcement team." "Enforcement?" I repeated. "This isn't a cul-de-sac dispute about lawn flamingos. They broke into an industrial property." He nodded. "I've already filed it as felony trespass and property damage. Question is, what the hell were they thinking? They left behind this." He held up a folded paper in a plastic evidence sleeve. I scanned the document. It was titled Emergency Architectural Enforcement Notice, with an embossed seal and signature from a John Hale, County Compliance Inspector. There was just one problem. I'd worked for the Federal Occupational Safety Bureau for 8 years. I knew every county inspector in a 100-mile radius. There was no John Hale. This thing was fake from top to bottom. I pulled out my phone and brought up the footage from that morning. Together, we watched one of the intruders, a man with thinning hair and a Summit Grove's ball cap, pull a tool from his back pocket and work the lock like he'd done it before. The other 2 entered casually behind him. No hesitation, no warrants. Just trespass dressed up like authority. "I'm forwarding this to the county prosecutor," Raines said. "There's no way this was a mistake. They came with intent." I walked him through everything. The HOA's attempt to force me into membership, their threats, the printed packet they left dangling from my front gate. I handed him the HOA annexation proposal. He flipped through it, frowning. "They used this as justification." "Looks like it." "And they impersonated a county official." "Not just impersonated, they put it in writing." He shook his head. "That's criminal fraud, forged government documents, destruction of private property. This could go federal, depending on how far they pushed it." I opened my security system archive and uploaded the footage to a secure cloud folder. Then I made another call to the county DA's office. I still had a few favors from my time in enforcement. The minute I mentioned a forged inspector's name and a breach into a locked industrial site, their intake officer got serious fast. By nightfall, the property was officially flagged as an active crime scene. Yellow tape stretched across the side entrance. The maintenance crew I'd scheduled for regular inspection was denied access until the investigation was complete. I'd already lost a full day of operations. Back at my office, I sat at my desk staring at a screenshot of the guy marking my crates. His face was blurry, but he looked pleased with himself, like he thought he was doing something righteous. They thought this was going to be a quiet scare tactic. A little pressure campaign to bring the outsider in line, but they broke into the wrong man's property. I wasn't about to let this go. Not by a long shot. The morning after the break-in, I was already downtown at the Washoe County District Attorney's Office by 8:15. I had copies of everything: camera footage, the forged inspection order, photos of the damage, the HOA packet from Nancy Greaves, and my own zoning documents. The intake officer barely glanced at my badge from the old federal days before ushering me straight in to see Assistant DA Laurel Pina. She took one look at the document marked John Hale, Inspector, and raised an eyebrow. "Who the hell is John Hale?" "He doesn't exist," I said. "And that seal on the paper? That's not ours. That's the HOA's logo run through a printer and stamped with a hobby store embossing press." She flipped through the packet from Summit Groves. "This came from them?" "Left on my front gate 1 week before the break-in." Laurel leaned back. "Jesus, they staged a municipal inspection on an industrial site without any jurisdiction and documented it. I've got video of them unlocking my door and marking equipment. These aren't bored retirees harassing lawn chairs. This was premeditated. By the time I left, she'd already contacted her investigator. A formal criminal case was being opened: criminal trespass, breaking and entering, vandalism, conspiracy, and use of forged legal documents. They were fast-tracking it because of the impersonation angle. Anything resembling false authority tends to rattle prosecutors, especially in a state where HOA abuses have made headlines before. But even with the criminal wheels turning, I wasn't done. I pulled up my old contacts from my time at the Occupational Safety Bureau. Within a few hours, I had a certified zoning map, industrial usage history, and property registration going back to 1996, all pulled from state archives. It was like building a case against a counterfeit currency ring, but the currency was HOA arrogance. By late afternoon, I was back at the yard walking with Officer Raines when his phone buzzed. He stepped away for a second, then came back shaking his head. "Well," he said, "you're not going to believe this. Apparently, Summit Groves filed a formal complaint with the sheriff's office against you, said you threatened their safety, and defamed their leadership in public forums." I stared at him. "Defame them? They broke into my shop. They claim your reaction was aggressive and destabilizing. They even included a copy of that private industrial zone sign you've had out front since forever as evidence you're antagonizing them." I laughed, but it wasn't funny. "They're trying to flip the narrative," I said. "They know I've got evidence, and they're trying to muddy the waters. This is textbook pushback. Shove guilt onto the victim." "Don't worry," Raines said. "Our case against them's already in motion. But I'd recommend lawyering up. You've poked a nest, and they just grabbed the nearest wasp." No kidding. That same night, I received an email from the Reno Gazette's community reporter. Subject line: HOA versus local business owner comment request. Attached was a draft of a statement from Summit Groves. They claimed they had attempted to mediate a long-standing eyesore that damaged neighborhood harmony, and that Mr. Rowell responded with hostility and inflammatory accusations. I called the reporter directly and gave a statement on the record. They forged county credentials, trespassed on private industrial land, and vandalized a legal business. The fact that they're trying to frame themselves as victims is as absurd as it is dangerous. Next morning, it hit the paper, and that's when things really started to boil. The HOA doubled down. Nancy Greaves issued a letter to all residents claiming I had orchestrated a media smear campaign and posed a danger to the neighborhood with aggressive conduct. It was laughable, except I knew where this was heading. They weren't just defending themselves, they were laying the foundation for a civil suit, trying to paint me as the problem. I wasn't going to wait for the next strike. That afternoon, I met with attorney Bryce Landon, a bulldog litigator with a background in property law and no patience for HOA overreach. We laid out the case: criminal charges underway, forged documents, false authority, and reputational damage. Bryce was blunt. "They want to sue you. Good. We'll bury them. But we're not playing defense. We go straight to offense. Harassment, defamation, damage to commercial operations, malicious misrepresentation. I want them accountable," I said. Not just stopped. "Then we go loud," he said. "We subpoena internal HOA communications, minutes from board meetings, every HOA-funded project ledger. If this wasn't a one-time stunt, we'll find the pattern." The fuse was officially lit. I didn't have to wait long to see the counterattack in action. 3 days after the article ran, I was served. A uniformed process server walked right into my reception office, dropped a fat stack of papers on the front desk, and said, "Civil complaint. Summit Grove's Homeowners Association versus Roll Fabrication and Metalworks." Bryce called me 10 minutes later. "They filed it," he said. "Defamation, reputational harm, emotional distress, and one I haven't seen in years, community destabilization. I didn't even know that was still on the books." "They actually went through with it?" I asked. "After everything. They're not trying to win, Gavin. They're trying to outlast you, flood you with paperwork, drag this through court, and hope the cost and hassle make you fold. Problem is, they picked a fight with someone who knows exactly how the system works." I met him that afternoon in his downtown office. We reviewed the complaint, 32 pages of manipulative half-truths. They claimed I had waged a public campaign to undermine the integrity of a peaceful residential community, that I had issued inflammatory statements to the press, and that my refusal to cooperate with reasonable visual standards was tantamount to civil hostility. It was a mess, but a strategic one. If the case made it to discovery before being dismissed, they could bury me in demands, emails, vendor lists, employee testimony, every invoice I'd touched in the past 5 years. "Let's make this real painful for them then," I said. We filed a counterclaim that same day: harassment, attempted coercion, willful destruction of commercial property, falsification of legal documents, and reputational damages. Our opening salvo? A demand for all HOA internal communications related to architectural enforcement actions, plus a full accounting of all times they'd entered private property in the last 2 years. Then Bryce did something smart. He sent a formal letter to the Office of the Nevada Attorney General, attaching all materials, including the forged inspector document, and formally requested a state-level review of Summit Grove's HOA for systemic abuse of power. While that was in motion, we started digging. It didn't take long before someone came forward. A man named Carl Meacham showed up at my shop. Late 60s, wore a service jacket from a defunct HVAC company, had the tired look of someone who'd been dealing with HOA harassment for too long. "I heard what happened to you," he said. "Figured it might be time I spoke up." He owned a small residential workshop 2 blocks south of my yard, used to build custom window frames, mostly for historical renovations. 2 years ago, the HOA showed up with a similar story. "Your building is unsightly. We want to bring it into visual compliance. Join voluntarily, or we escalate." Carl didn't have a lawyer. He didn't have cameras or contacts in government. What he had was a heart condition, a shed full of tools, and not enough fight left in him to argue. So when they came back with a fake code violation warning and threatened fines through a compliance subcommittee, he signed the membership agreement. Since then, he'd been paying dues to an association that never represented him, and his front yard had been forcibly converted to community-compatible landscaping, meaning HOA-approved gravel, HOA-approved bushes, and not a single thing he wanted. "I didn't think anyone would believe me," Carl said. "Until now." Bryce had him sign a sworn affidavit. We recorded a video interview. That alone would have been enough for us to build a pattern, but it got better. One of the former HOA board members, Melissa Trant, a former treasurer, reached out through Bryce's office. She said she was ready to talk. I met her in Bryce's office the next day. Late 30s, sharp-eyed, clearly nervous. "I can't believe I was part of this," she said quietly. I didn't know how deep it went until it was too late. She brought documents. Copies of internal memos from Nancy, outlining visual assimilation strategies, meeting minutes that showed plans to target problem zones with soft coercion, followed by enforcement threats. One note even referred to me directly. "If Rowell refuses to comply, we apply pressure. No one is above the image of Summit Groves." Melissa handed over emails, drafts of the fake inspection order, expense logs showing HOA money spent on private contractors labeled special visual audits. It was all there. We now had proof of premeditation, proof of funds misused, and proof that I wasn't the first target. Bryce leaned back in his chair, looking at the growing stack of documents. "They've been running this like a mob operation," he said, "but we're going to treat it like a racketeering case. We're pushing this past civil court. This isn't a petty zoning squabble. This is a systematic campaign to expand their power through force, fraud, and intimidation." I nodded slowly. "Then let's burn it down." By the time the state got involved, the Summit Groves HOA was already wobbling like a three-legged stool. All we had to do was kick. The Nevada Attorney General's office responded faster than expected. 2 days after we filed our complaint, I received a phone call from an investigator named Justine Kroll. She wanted copies of everything: video, documents, maps, Melissa's memos, Carl's affidavit, even photos of the marked crates in my shop. I uploaded it all to a secure drive and added one more file, the fake Emergency Architectural Enforcement Notice, complete with Nancy Greaves' signature and the phantom inspector seal. Justine didn't waste time. We're opening a formal inquiry into Summit Groves HOA under Nevada statutes Paragraph 116 Sounders for fraudulent governance and abuse of authority. This is serious, Mr. Rowell. It's not the first complaint we've had about them. Not the first. She wouldn't go into detail, but that one line told me more than I needed. These people had done this before, probably multiple times. Only this time, they targeted someone who knew how to fight back. Meanwhile, the civil case dragged on. Bryce was having a field day in discovery. Their lawyer, a smug man named Dorian Thatch, tried every delay tactic in the book: motions to quash subpoenas, protective orders, requests for confidentiality. But Bryce was relentless. For every trick they pulled, he hit back twice as hard. Then we struck gold. During the subpoenaed email dump, we found correspondence between Nancy and her so-called compliance team. These weren't just routine memos. They were tactical instructions. One email read, "If he refuses visual alignment, proceed with Plan B. Surprise enforcement visit. Make it seem official. Leave no gaps in documentation, but use HOA letterhead only." We can't risk county scrutiny. They knew exactly what they were doing. They weren't just clueless HOA zealots. They were coordinating illegal action using HOA infrastructure as cover. Even better, Bryce's investigators found at least 4 other properties: a mechanic's garage, a furniture refinishing shop, a solo-run welding shack, and a mom-and-pop storage unit business that had all reported similar voluntary HOA invitations, followed by threats or inspections. We reached out. 2 agreed to join the case. The others were hesitant, burned out, scared of legal mess. One woman broke down crying on the phone, saying she'd been hit with compliance violation fines for putting out a non-HOA approved waste bin behind her garage. This wasn't just one abuse of power, it was a damn racket. With mounting evidence, Bryce added civil racketeering to our counterclaim. And that's when the dominoes started to fall. An emergency board meeting was called at Summit Groves. Melissa tipped us off. It wasn't about the case, not publicly. It was a damage control session. Nancy had ordered the deletion of several emails and tried to push through a vote to block further financial disclosures to non-member entities. Melissa, bless her, had already printed out the emails. We turned them over. Bryce sent a notice of potential spoliation of evidence to their attorney within the hour. Now they weren't just in trouble, they were in deep. The media picked up the heat. A piece ran in the Reno Gazette titled HOA or Hostile Operation. Lawsuit uncovers alleged extortion network in upscale neighborhood. Photos of my shop appeared next to security stills of the break-in. Melissa's memos were redacted and published. Public opinion flipped. Emails flooded my business page, some angry, some grateful, some offering donations to stand up to the HOA cartel. The HOA released a tone-deaf statement calling me a disruptive outside actor exploiting bureaucratic chaos. Nancy herself doubled down, telling a reporter on camera that I was attacking her for simply maintaining beauty and order. But this time, the sheriff's department wasn't laughing. Officer Raines showed up at my yard with a warrant, not for me, for evidence gathering. It was coordinated with the Attorney General's office. They were about to execute searches at HOA headquarters, that little beige community center building at the front of Summit Groves. Yeah, they raided it. Computers, paperwork, financial ledgers, external drives. Word got out. Residents were stunned. People who once glared at me from behind hydrangea hedges now waved sheepishly as I passed their manicured streets. Bryce and I sat back and watched the fire spread. Then came the best part. Nancy tried to delete her HOA email account. IT firm hired by the HOA pulled the server logs. Turns out their mailboxes were hosted on a third-party provider with a daily retention backup. Everything she deleted, still accessible. The AG's office issued a target letter to Nancy Greaves. She was now the focus of a criminal investigation. And we weren't done. I always believed that if you applied enough pressure to a corrupt system, it would either crack or implode. I just didn't expect it to happen this fast. By the time the Attorney General's office wrapped the initial audit, Summit Grove's HOA looked less like a neighborhood association and more like a shell corporation run by paranoid bullies. A week after the search of their office, subpoenas were flying. Nancy Greaves was officially named as the primary subject of a criminal probe for forgery, misuse of funds, criminal trespass, and impersonating a government official. Her public denial didn't last long, not after the press got hold of a document that read Visual Enforcement Strategy, Phase 2, Industrial Targets. I stood in front of my shop that morning with Bryce, watching as a local news van parked across the street. "They're calling it a shakedown ring," he said, shaking his head. "This is going national," and he wasn't exaggerating. That night, a segment ran on the evening news across 3 states. HOA from hell. Homeowners Association accused of running illegal extortion scheme against local businesses. They showed drone footage of my shop, highlighted surveillance stills from the raid, and even clipped part of Melissa's interview. Carl's story ran right after, followed by 2 other victims we hadn't even heard from yet. My inbox exploded, so did Bryce's. Then something unexpected happened. HOA members began resigning. First, it was a treasurer, then 2 board members, then the secretary. Melissa kept us informed in real time. She said Nancy tried to hold an emergency vote to restructure leadership, but the board fractured. The treasurer admitted under oath that they had been pressured to sign blank reimbursement checks. One of the board members testified on camera that they believed Nancy was running her own private empire under the HOA name. Then came the financials. The AG's forensic accountant found tens of thousands of dollars diverted to unapproved landscaping upgrades, community visual projects, and payments to private contractors hired for off-record inspections. Several of those contractors turned out to be unlicensed. One of them had a criminal record. Another had been impersonating a code enforcement officer. Meanwhile, Bryce filed a motion for punitive damages, increasing our counterclaim to a whopping $700,000 based on lost revenue, brand damage, attorney fees, and psychological stress caused by organized harassment. Then the bombshell. A formal cease and desist order was issued against Summit Grove's HOA by the State Licensing Division, freezing all their enforcement operations pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Nancy responded by going off the rails. She posted a public statement on the HOA's social feed, accusing the Attorney General's office of being politically weaponized, calling me a rogue industrialist with a vendetta, and claiming she was the victim of a targeted smear campaign driven by men who fear strong women. Didn't matter. The court of public opinion had already turned. Neighbors who once tried to have my flagpole removed were now pulling their HOA decals off their cars. Some posted apologies. One even brought over a pie. But I wasn't here for pie. I was here to finish what they started. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The AG's office confirmed that criminal charges were being filed against Nancy. 2 counts of forgery, 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud, 1 count of felony trespassing, 1 count of impersonating a government official, and multiple counts of abuse of authority under HOA statute. It wasn't just a civil mess anymore. It was a full-blown criminal prosecution. Nancy was arrested at home. The footage aired that night. She tried to slam the door, but deputies forced it open. The clip showed her in a floral robe, screaming about justice and liberty while being cuffed and walked to a squad car. Summit Grove's HOA was effectively leaderless. The community center was shuttered. Their website went down. Residents began circulating petitions to dissolve the HOA entirely. I drove past the sign at the community entrance the next morning. Someone had spray painted over it. "No more tyranny. Property rights first." I parked, got out, and took a photo. Then I drove back to my yard and got back to work, because even after all this, we weren't done yet. There was something surreal about walking into a courtroom and knowing, without a shred of doubt, that the law was finally swinging in your direction. The trial opened in Clark County Superior Court with a packed gallery. Press rows were filled. Business owners from other parts of the state came to observe. I even spotted Melissa in the back row, wearing a plain navy suit and looking more like a quiet witness than someone who helped bring down an empire. Nancy Greaves sat stiffly at the defense table in a beige blazer, jaw clenched, not a trace of her former smugness left. Her attorney tried to argue selective prosecution, claimed she had no criminal intent, that she was merely misguided in her attempts to maintain neighborhood standards. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bryce opened with the surveillance footage. HOA agents prying open my shop's side door, stepping in with flashlights, marking property like they were running a drug bust. The jury didn't flinch. They watched silently as the timestamp ticked through 15 full minutes of trespass and illegal recording. Then came the emails, the Phase 2 Industrial Targets memo, the internal thread outlining how to fabricate inspection paperwork, and a calendar entry titled Carl's Lot Pressure Visit. Carl testified next. His hands trembled as he described the night someone left a printed HOA violation notice taped to his bedroom window, even though his home, like mine, wasn't under their jurisdiction. He told the jury about being harassed for months until he gave up and sold his equipment to avoid conflict. The room was dead silent. Then Melissa stepped forward. Her testimony was the nail in the coffin. She explained how she discovered Nancy's falsified documents, how internal votes were rigged, how HOA dues were funneled into visual improvement projects that didn't exist. She produced bank statements showing thousands paid to cash-only contractors who never filed permits or logged hours. And then Bryce dropped the final bomb. He presented server logs from the HOA's email host, showing deletion attempts, evidence of backdating documents, and emails between Nancy and her board, suggesting a plan to destroy paper files after the AG's office got involved. By day 4, the judge cut the defense short. You can't claim good faith when you're burning the rulebook. The verdict came in before the week was over. Guilty on all counts. Nancy didn't blink. She just sat there, staring forward like she'd short-circuited. When the judge read her sentence, 12 years in a Nevada state facility with eligibility for parole no earlier than year 8, her mouth finally moved. "You're all just jealous," she muttered, but the courtroom had already moved on. HOA operations were officially terminated by court order. A state-appointed receiver was sent to liquidate the HOA's remaining funds and assets. Their community center sold at auction. The gate infrastructure they'd paid so much for dismantled. The private roads were handed over to the county, and residents were given the option to either self-manage or dissolve completely. They chose dissolution. That night, I took a bottle of decent whiskey up to my shop roof. From there, you could see the edge of Summit Groves. Quiet now. No patrols, no HOA vehicles, no signs posted about garden aesthetics or garage door color limits. And you know what? It looked just fine. 2 months later, my yard finally felt like mine again. The cameras were still up, the locks upgraded, and the entry gate bore a small new plate beneath the Rowell Fabrication and Metalwork sign. It read, in big burnished steel letters, Private Industrial Zone. This property is not, never was, and never will be part of any HOA. Customers started returning, some with handshakes, some with jokes about Summit invasions, but all with orders. Big ones. We booked 3 new industrial clients in the span of 2 weeks. Apparently standing up to a corrupt HOA was good for business. Carl dropped by with his son one afternoon, carrying a 6-pack and a signed transfer deed. Turns out he managed to reacquire his old lot through the county sale. "Thought you might want it," he said, grinning. Consider it a neighborly gesture, one that doesn't involve threats or fake inspections. Melissa, now comfortably employed at a downtown law firm, sent me a box of court transcripts and a handwritten note. "You taught me that standing still is just another way of giving permission. Thanks for not staying still." And as for the Summit Groves area, without the HOA's iron grip, the residents had a strange awakening. They started talking to each other. A couple of them even formed a local volunteer association, non-binding, optional, no fees, just neighbors helping each other out. Imagine that. Nancy, of course, was now inmate ICE 48127, serving her sentence upstate. The press lost interest after a few weeks, and her name became more of a cautionary tale than a headline. But I didn't care about headlines anymore. I cared about peace, steel, and the sound of saws and welders humming through an honest day's work. One morning, a group of new business owners stopped by. They were looking at the industrial lots across the road, wanted to know about local politics, zoning nightmares, and any weird associations to watch out for. I walked them around the fence line and pointed to the sign. "This land's clean," I said. "No HOA, no drama, just work." They nodded, relieved. One of them chuckled. You must have fought like hell to keep it that way. I smiled and looked down at my boots. You have no idea.